There is a very specific, quiet kind of fear that settles deeply into a man's bones when he realizes his own body is no longer listening to his commands. It does not happen overnight. It sneaks up on you, hiding in the little moments of your day. I spent 32 years working down at the logistics center here in Knoxville. I was a floor supervisor, and let me tell you exactly what that meant for a man's body. It meant waking up at 4 in the morning, lacing up heavy steel-toed work boots, and walking on hard, freezing concrete for 10, sometimes 12 hours a single shift. I spent 3 decades climbing up and down wet metal loading docks, moving heavy wooden pallets, and carrying the physical weight of my family's survival on my shoulders and my thighs. Through all those years, through all the overtime and the double shifts, I never once worried about my legs giving out. I never even thought about them. I just assumed that physical strength was something I owned permanently, like the deed to my house or the old Ford truck sitting out in my driveway. I truly believed that because I had built that muscle through decades of hard, honest labor, it would simply stay with me forever. I thought I had poured a concrete foundation that would never crack. But the human body does not care what you did 20 years ago. It does not remember the heavy crates you lifted in the 90s. When I finally retired and traded the constant noise and movement of the warehouse floor for the quiet, soft cushions of my living room recliner, my body registered that the heavy demands were officially over. And because I stopped demanding that strength, my body started to quietly pack it up and throw it away. I started noticing it first in the subtle things. There was a new, strange hesitation right before I took the first step down the wooden stairs into my basement. For 40 years, I used to just turn and walk down those steps without looking at my feet. But suddenly, I found myself pausing at the top. I started reaching out and gripping the oak handrail tightly, not because I was actually slipping, but because some quiet alarm bell in the back of my mind told me I could not trust my own balance anymore. I felt a heavy, dragging sensation in my thighs whenever I walked up the slight incline of my gravel driveway to get the morning paper. I ignored it. I blamed the damp Tennessee weather. I told myself my boots were just getting old and heavy. Men of my generation have a terrible destructive habit of wrapping our physical decline in pride and flat out refusing to look at the truth. We convince ourselves that if we do not talk about the weakness, it is not really happening. The moment that finally broke through my stubbornness, the moment I knew I was in genuine, undeniable trouble, happened right in my own living room on a quiet Tuesday afternoon. My wife, Linda, had gone down to the grocery store and the house was completely silent. I had been sitting in my deep reading chair for about 2 hours just watching a long historical documentary on the television. When the program ended, I leaned forward, planted my feet on the carpet, and tried to push myself up to go to the kitchen for a glass of water. My legs simply did not respond. They felt completely hollowed out, as if someone had drained all the power and the density right out of my muscles. They did not have the physical strength to lift my own body weight out of the cushion. I had to stop, catch my breath, rock my torso back and forth twice to build momentum, and push off the wooden armrest with all my upper body strength, just to struggle to a standing position. I stood there in the middle of the empty room, my heart hammering in my chest, feeling a wave of deep, cold embarrassment, even though no one was watching. But more than the embarrassment, I felt terror. I realized right then that if I had slipped and fallen to the floor, I might not have had the leg strength to get myself back up. The foundation of my independence was crumbling right beneath me, and I knew I had to do something drastic before my world shrank down to the size of that recliner. I finally swallowed my pride and went to see my doctor. I was pushed largely by my daughter Megan, who is 44 years old and works as an occupational therapist. She spends every single day working with older folks who have lost their mobility, and she absolutely refuses to let me lie to myself about my health. Sitting on that crinkly paper on the exam table, feeling every single one of my 73 years, I learned a hard and frightening truth. That heavy, dragging weakness, that unsteadiness on the stairs, it is not just a normal, acceptable part of getting older that you are supposed to quietly surrender to. It is a loud, blaring warning sign from your body. The doctor explained that I was actively losing muscle mass, a destructive process they call sarcopenia, and that my nervous system was actively losing its ability to communicate with my lower limbs. He looked me right in the eye and told me that if a man ignores this creeping weakness, it leads down a direct, unavoidable path to dangerous falls, shattered hips, and spending the rest of your life waiting for someone else to help you use the bathroom. But he also told me something that gave me a foothold. He said this decline was not a one-way street. I did not have to just sit there and accept it. But he warned me that simply trying to walk more was not going to fix the root of the problem. My foundation was missing. I was asking my aging body to build and repair strength without giving it the raw, essential biological tools it desperately needed to do the job. I spent the next several months treating this problem like a broken piece of machinery in the warehouse. I wanted to understand exactly why my engine was failing. I read every piece of clinical research Megan printed out for me. I had long conversations with the pharmacist down the road. What I discovered completely shifted my perspective on getting older. It turns out there are 3 very specific, highly critical vitamins that are absolutely non-negotiable for maintaining leg strength, protecting nerve function, and keeping the lower body circulation flowing after you cross 60 years of age. And the massive problem I face, the exact same invisible problem so many of my friends in this neighborhood are facing right now without even knowing it, is that I was not getting nearly enough of them in my daily meals, and my aging digestive system was no longer absorbing them correctly. I realized I did not need an expensive gym membership. I did not need complicated physical therapy on strange machines. I needed to fix my internal chemistry. I found exactly what worked for me, and I'm going to share all 3 of these crucial elements with you right now, including the exact habits and timings that completely changed the trajectory of my life. The first essential tool I had to fix, and the one that shocked me the most because I honestly thought I had it covered, was my vitamin D level. Now, like most folks my age, I always associated vitamin D entirely with bone health. I thought it was just something you needed to prevent osteoporosis and keep your skeleton from getting brittle. I figured because I spent a good amount of time out in the backyard working in Linda's garden and mowing the lawn, I was getting plenty of natural sunlight and therefore plenty of vitamin D. But that is the first major trap of aging. Megan sat me down at the kitchen table and explained the biology of it. As we get older, our skin becomes drastically less efficient at converting that sunlight into the vitamin, and our aging kidneys actually struggle to activate it into a form the body can use. I read a piece of medical research she showed me, a long-term clinical observation of older adults. The data showed that a staggering majority of people over 60 are walking around severely deficient. But here is the critical part that nobody ever mentions on the evening news. Vitamin D is not just for your bones. It plays an absolutely critical foundational role in muscle protein synthesis. Your actual muscle tissue, the fibers in your thighs and your calves, have specific vitamin D receptors on them, just waiting for this nutrient to arrive so they can start the repair process. When you're deficient, your muscles simply cannot rebuild themselves no matter how much protein you eat or how many walks you take. Low levels are directly biologically linked to that heavy, dragging feeling in the lower body, a massive reduction in physical power, and a terrifying increase in the risk of falling. When my doctor finally ran my blood work, the numbers were terrible. I was severely low, despite all my time out in the sun. Fixing my vitamin D level felt like waking up a sleeping giant inside my own legs, but I had to do it the right way. My doctor recommended a high, controlled daily dose to aggressively correct my severe deficiency. He explained that seniors like us often need anywhere from 2,000 to 5,000 international units of D3 every single day just to maintain healthy blood levels, depending on where our baseline is. But he gave me a piece of practical advice that changed the entire equation. Vitamin D is a fat-soluble vitamin. If you just swallow that little pill in the morning with a glass of tap water and a dry piece of toast, your body cannot absorb it. It will just pass right through you, and you are essentially washing your money down the drain. It absolutely requires dietary fat to be absorbed through the intestinal wall. So I completely changed my morning routine. I stopped eating a plain bowl of oatmeal. Instead, I started eating 2 whole eggs every single morning, cooked slowly in a cast iron skillet with a little bit of real butter. Sometimes Linda and I would mash up half an avocado and put it on whole grain toast. I would take my vitamin D right in the middle of that high-fat meal. The moment I started giving my body the fat it needed to absorb the vitamin, everything shifted. It did not happen in a day, but about 6 weeks into this new routine. I woke up, swung my legs out of bed, and realized they did not feel like lead weights anymore. The natural, springy strength was returning to my thighs. I was not lifting any heavy weights. My body finally just had the biological instructions and the raw materials it needed to repair its own tissue. The second critical issue I had to address was the one that had me genuinely lying awake at night, worried I was developing a permanent, crippling disease. The problem was originating deep within my nervous system. I would be walking across the living room, actively telling my legs to move, but there was a quiet, deeply frightening delay in the execution of the movement. Worse than that, I constantly had this strange, tingly, burning sensation running down my shins, and the bottoms of my feet often felt completely numb. It honestly felt like I was trying to walk on thick, wet sponges. When you cannot properly feel the solid ground beneath the soles of your shoes, your brain panics. It hesitates. It erodes your physical confidence with every single step you take. I found myself making excuses not to carry my youngest grandson because I was terrified I would step wrong on a numb foot, lose my balance, and drop him. Megan explained to me that this is frequently a direct result of nerve damage, a condition often called peripheral neuropathy, which affects nearly 1 in 3 seniors. What so many people do not realize is that vitamin B12 is the absolute non-negotiable anchor of all nerve health. It is fundamentally essential for producing something called the myelin sheath. That sheath is the protective outer coating around your nerves, acting exactly like the thick rubber insulation on a copper electrical wire. If that coating gets thin or damaged, the electrical signal from your brain gets lost, delayed, or completely scrambled before it ever reaches your leg muscles. I discovered that the major hidden trap for people our age is that we simply do not absorb B12 through normal digestion the way we did when we were 40. Our stomachs stop producing the high levels of acid needed to separate the B12 from the meat and dairy we eat. I had a good friend from the old neighborhood, a retired postman named Frank. Frank was the toughest guy I knew. He carried a heavy leather mail satchel over his shoulder for 40 years, walking through snow and sleet. But a few years ago, Frank started walking with a terrible shuffle. He was always complaining that his feet were freezing and numb, He finally went to his doctor, and they found a massive, dangerous B12 deficiency. Because his digestive system was so compromised by age, swallowing regular vitamin pills did absolutely nothing for him. His doctor had to start him on direct vitamin B12 injections. I watched the change in Frank with my own eyes, and it was profound. Within 2 months of getting his levels up, Frank was walking with a steady, confident gait again. The numbness entirely faded, and he went back to volunteering on his feet down at the local soup kitchen. Frank's terrifying experience convinced me I could not ignore the numbness in my own feet. Since I am over 70, I knew I was likely not absorbing the B12 from my dinners effectively. I chose to take a different, highly targeted route. I started using sublingual tablets, which are tiny pills designed to dissolve slowly straight under the tongue. Because they dissolve in the mouth, they bypass the compromised stomach and the digestive system entirely, absorbing directly into the bloodstream through the rich network of blood vessels under the tongue. Following the general guidance for seniors with severe absorption issues, I aim for 1,000 micrograms of a high-quality form called methylcobalamin B12 every single morning. This specific active form of B12 aggressively supported my nerve conduction. It also helped boost my red blood cell production, which meant more oxygen was actually reaching my working muscles when I walked. It took a few months of daily consistency, but that terrifying, tingly sensation in my shins slowly faded away. The delay in my step completely vanished. The wet sponge feeling evaporated, and my brain was finally talking clearly to my legs again. The final key that unlocked my lower body strength had everything to do with flow and circulation. If you do not have strong, consistent blood flow down to your extremities, your leg muscles are essentially suffocating. They are starving for the fuel and the oxygen they desperately need to contract and hold your weight. For years, my calves would always feel ice cold to the touch, even in the middle of a hot Tennessee summer. I used to wear thick wool socks to bed in July just to keep my feet from aching. If I stood still in the garage for too long working on a project, my lower legs would ache fiercely, a deep, throbbing pain that only went away if I sat down and elevated my feet. Megan helped me understand that a powerful, often overlooked antioxidant called vitamin E is absolutely essential for supporting healthy, robust blood flow in the lower body. This specific vitamin is critical for protecting the delicate inner lining of your blood vessels from oxidative damage, ensuring they stay flexible, wide open, and clear. Chronic low-grade inflammation is a major silent driver of muscle loss as we age, and vitamin E's powerful anti-inflammatory properties directly counter this destructive process. When your blood vessels are healthy and your blood flow improves, you get a massive surge of oxygen and vital nutrients reaching the deep muscle tissue in your legs, and your body is able to flush out the inflammatory waste products that cause cramping and fatigue much faster. This creates the optimal, perfect internal environment for rebuilding lost tissue, maintaining leg power, and massively upping your daily physical endurance. I knew I needed to look beyond just buying another standard bottle of cheap vitamin pills. Megan strongly encouraged me to look at vitamin E as a foundational structural part of my daily grocery list. I started actively, consciously incorporating natural, whole food sources of vitamin E into every single meal I ate. Linda and I started buying big bags of raw almonds and sunflower seeds, keeping them in a bowl on the kitchen counter to have as snacks in the afternoon instead of eating crackers or chips. I made a concerted, deliberate effort to eat much more dark spinach, and I started adding thick slices of avocado to my lunchtime salads and my morning toast. When I did eventually look for a supplement to help boost my levels, I read the labels very carefully. I made sure I was not just buying synthetic alpha tocopherol, which is the cheap isolated chemical you find in most discount pharmacy bottles. Instead, I specifically looked for high-quality supplements containing mixed tocopherols and tocotrienols. That is exactly how vitamin E exists in the natural world, and it is what the clinical research suggests is far more effective for actually reducing systemic inflammation in an older body. I followed the general medical advice that taking 100 to 200 international units daily is typically safe and highly effective, and Megan gave me one more vital practical pro tip to get the absolute most out of my nutrition. She told me that when you combine vitamin E with vitamin C, it creates a powerful synergy. The vitamin C actually recharges the vitamin E, enhancing its overall effectiveness and allowing my aging body to use these nutrients much more efficiently over a longer period of time. I started taking my vitamin E right after my main dinner meal, ensuring there was plenty of healthy fat from the meat or olive oil to guarantee maximum absorption into my system. It was a slow process, but eventually the natural warmth returned to my feet. The thick wool socks went back into the winter drawer, and that deep, aching, throbbing fatigue that used to prevent me from standing at my workbench for long periods entirely disappeared. You do not need to buy an expensive, intimidating gym membership to take your legs back. You do not need to force your aging joints to lift heavy iron weights. And most importantly, you absolutely do not have to let a culture of complacency convince you that severe physical decline is your only option after 60. You just have to decide to stop ignoring the problem, pay close, honest attention to the raw biological machinery you already own, and give it exactly what it is desperately asking for. I will never forget the exact moment I realized my new daily routine was truly, undeniably working. It was about 4 months after I started strictly prioritizing these 3 vitamins and changing my meals. Linda and I were down at the church on a Saturday morning, getting the fellowship hall ready for the big spring community pancake breakfast. We needed supplies from the lower pantry. I found myself standing at the bottom of the basement stairs, staring at a massive 30-pound paper bag of baking flour. The stairs were steep, narrow, and made of solid concrete. A year ago, I would have stared at that bag, swallowed my pride, walked back upstairs empty-handed, and asked one of the younger deacons to carry it up for me. I would have known, deep down, that if I tried to carry that weight up those stairs, my legs would have surely buckled and collapsed under me. But that morning was different. I just stepped up to the bag, planted my work boots firmly on the concrete floor, and felt a deep, steady, quiet power resting in my thighs. I kept my back straight, bent my knees, grabbed the thick paper, and drove my heels into the floor to stand up. My legs did not shake. My knees did not tremble. I held that heavy bag against my chest and walked up those steep concrete steps with a firm, solid, unwavering gait. There was no hesitation. There was no quiet fear in the back of my mind. I reached the top of the stairs, set the flour on the kitchen counter, and took a deep breath. Linda looked over at me from the sink, and she just smiled. She knew exactly what that moment meant. I had my body back. I was a strong, capable man again. I am not asking you to make any radical, impossible, overwhelming changes to your life overnight. That never works for anyone anyway. I am simply asking you to start tomorrow morning. When you sit down to eat your breakfast, look at your plate and ask yourself if your vitamin D has enough healthy fat to actually absorb into your system. Ask yourself if you are truly supporting your delicate nerve health with the right, highly absorbable form of B12, or if you are just hoping your aging stomach is doing a job it can no longer do. Ask yourself if your vitamin E intake is optimized to keep the blood flowing warm and strong down to your calves and your feet. Do not wait until you suffer a catastrophic fall on your front porch to take this seriously. Do not wait until you cannot get out of your favorite chair without calling your children for help. Muscle does not just disappear overnight. It packs its bags and slowly leaves when you stop giving it a reason to stay and when you stop providing the fundamental nutrients it needs to rebuild. I'm going to be right here, eating my eggs and my spinach in the morning, taking my deliberate walks down the driveway, and holding the line on my physical independence. I hope you will decide to do exactly the same because true, lasting freedom does not come from a pill or a doctor's office. It begins from the ground up with the foundation underneath your own 2 feet.